I was so deep into the game, I didn't want it to end.
Is there immersed or is there like hypnotized?
Games make really interesting philosophical thought experiments.
I'm really doing well in the game, it's really immersive, but then morally, it's not right.
You wouldn't emotionally relate to a character if they just had a perfect life.
Games still have that stigma about them being a waste of time.
Hey, and welcome back to gTV. I'm Jay-Ann Lopez, and today we're talking about immersion in games. And I'm joined by three dope guests to discuss this with me. I'm joined by Stephanie Ijeoma, CEO, founder, gaming consultant, and entrepreneur, George Osborn, head of comms at UKIE and co-chair of GameSaid, and Jordan Erica Weber, broadcast presenter, gamer, and writer. So, immersion. First things first, tell me the most immersive game that you've played.
I don't tend to spend hours and hours and hours in one game. Like there are games that I'll play for, days, but it will be like a couple of hours a day. So games like The Sims, games without end. I'll get into them for weeks, months at a time. But for me, immersion is like emotional involvement in a game.
Right.
That's when I get really into it. You know, like when you're reading a really good book and you close it and you feel a bit like spaced because you're still in the book.
Yeah.
I get that with games too. So lately, like Before Your Eyes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
oh my gosh, that game. Because I think also because you play it by blinking.
Yeah.
So it's like this kind of very, very embodied experience. Like it's very first person. It's very like what my body is doing is making the story happen.
Be immersed.
Right. Yeah. So that game, incredibly immersive, and because of the story and the characters as well.
100%.
So that's a good example for me, I think.
Anyone else? Okay.
I mean, growing up as a gamer, like I've played all kinds of immersive games from The Sims. You can even say World of Warcraft is somehow immersive. But I think recently playing The Quarry actually.
Really?
Yeah. So even though I had to, for work, obviously I had to complete it in about a day because I had to kind of know the ins and outs of the game.
Jesus. That game.
Literally. I know.
Did you sleep?
No, I didn't. But you know what? I'm not really into those kind of interactive games, but this game really caught me.
Okay.
And it was so immersive. Like you said, I grew an emotional attachment to some of the characters. Obviously, the premise of the game is to try and make sure that the characters survive through the night. So I started growing attachments to certain characters of the game. And it got to the point where I was so deep into the game, I didn't want it to end. And it got to a point where I actually replayed the game to try and have another alternative ending. But I guess another game I would definitely say Ghost of Tsushima, one of my favorite games of all time. The way it took me out of current day to that, feudal Japan. That was an incredible game for me.
Yeah.
And of course The Sims, but yeah.
Of course,
I mean,
The Sims.
of course.
The Sims.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, so of course, The Sims. But so there's, again, there's a kind of a similar thing there where there are so many games that I've ended up immersing myself into. I mean, Breath of the Wild for me was one game where I can remember literally just running across fields and climbing up the side of mountains for hours. But the one for me is
Link can do that.
Link
What
can
level
do
are
that.
you on?
Link can do that.
Because
exactly. That's the thing.
The
It's just,
energy depletes quickly.
you're given full freedom, provided that your stamina wheel doesn't run out. At which point you're falling very fast.
And you pride yourself in your stamina.
Well, exactly. I do a lot of running. So let's just clarify that. Let's just
On the wrong track, but go ahead.
But the game for me that I think I always go back to for this is Football Manager because
Really?
I mean I love Football Manager. It's the game that I've played most over the course of my life, literally thousands of hours of this. But because it's all based around real world players and everything in there is essentially accurate, every time you play it feels like you're sort of pulling a lever on like an alternate universe that's all about football. So I get into those games to the point where I have notepads filled with notes on players, how they play, tactics, all of those kinds of things. And I'm going to admit something, which is the fact that sometimes when I'm struggling to sleep, I would just think about my Football Manager team.
Yeah.
I would just sit there working it through my head, being like, oh, I've got a tricky fixture coming up against Tanana next. All right, what are we going to be doing? And I'll be there, and then I'll just drift off. So that's how immersed I can get.
There's a meme like that. So like they'll say like your wife or something, like, oh, I bet he's not thinking about me, and then you're literally thinking about your strategy.
It's just literally just like I can't find a false nine for my. Oh my goodness me! So
that's so interesting though, because it's like the game that you are most immersed in is one that is to do with something in real life. You're immersed in your real life hobby of football.
Right.
And I think what's really interesting as well on this one is that the people who play football are also immersed in it too.
Yeah.
So it's now getting to the point where
It's a
Football
mirror.
Manager,
Yeah.
well, it's also influencing. So I've heard stories from like the studio where agents have phoned up to say, Yeah, the game says my player's quite injury prone. Can you get rid of that? Because that's going to stop my player from getting signed, or it's got injury history things. So yeah, so that's the case, is that games can be so immersive that they can actually, as well in the certain circumstances, change the real world, which I think is amazing.
That is a really good story. I'm not going to lie, I've played Football Manager. Hated it.
We tried, didn't we?
You're not into football games anyway.
I could not even for 5 minutes. I tried just to hold it. And no, but that then begs the question: what is immersion for each person? Because what will immerse me is not the same thing that will immerse you. But games are also trying to, I guess, in a way, they're trying to standardize that, right? They'll go for the open world because, we're going for those two words always match up: open world and immersive games. But now you've just shown that that's not necessarily true. No. So, what are the qualities of a game that will immerse you?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Thank you.
And we've just all sort of gone, oh my God, that's a good question. Give it a second.
But it's like I said, it's kind of like emotional involvement, emotional engagement, and like novelty. Like I'm really, really interested in novelties. Actually, open world games don't tend to do it for me very often. I like the Assassin's Creed games because it's always like a new world.
Right.
Yeah. But like Breath of the Wild, I was like, I don't want to run around a field. I've got no interest in that.
Field. You've got the slow bit, you've got the desert.
There are some mountains, there are different places to run around. But what I think is interesting about that point about what's immersive, if you look around and look at things like research, so Ofcom, who do all of like the regulation of stuff, they do this thing every year called Online Nation, where they look at like the habits of people online. They ask questions about online play and like why do people play, especially like why do kids play. And what you see is like there's never a single reason. It will be, I mean, the one that always lands top, which I think is interesting, is creativity. That's why people are playing online games. They like to be able to express themselves. They like to be able to, especially in games like Minecraft and Roblox. But sometimes it will be about emotional connection to the story, or it will be that sense of feeling like you're part of a world.
Like playing with friends.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And actually, just one of the big ones is giving you that space to relax by yourself, right? It's not so much with online games, but with most games, like actually having that time to chill out with a great puzzle game or a city builder or something like that just can take you out of the world and just give you that time off. You know, so loads of different reasons, I'd say.
Yeah, because I was going to say, it doesn't even mean that immersion is not, like immersion just is not a thing. To play a game, you kind of have to be immersed, right?
Yeah.
It's very subjective.
Right, exactly.
I definitely feel like, you know, immersion can just be how you want it to be. It doesn't have to be the open world, doesn't have to be an RPG, but then it can also be games that tie into certain things. So like you said, well, like you mentioned, Assassin's Creed, one of the reasons why Assassin's Creed is really profound and known as a really big franchise and a great franchise is because there's so many tie-ins. So it's like that family lineage, and that's where people are immersed in it because they want to know, even though you know you're in a different timeline, how is it connected and stuff like that. Which is why I love the Assassin's Creed heritage. But then there's games like mobile games. People who play, for example, Call of Duty, they don't necessarily play it on PC. They'll prefer to play it on mobile, and that's their immersion, you know, and that's their escape. So
I was just going to say, I mean, if you've seen people on the bus playing Candy Crush, they're pretty immersed, right? You know, they're well into that.
So is there immersed or is there like hypnotized?
I think it's interesting with games like Candy Crush and mobile games. I think it's more about the situation. Like when you're on a bus, what else are you going to do?
Right.
Like stare
so
out
are
the
you
window?
immersed or are you bored?
Yeah, exactly. Like you're immersed in the game because it's like a more fun thing to do than looking out the window at the buildings.
Yeah, exactly. Like you might be thinking about listening to a podcast, like reading a book or whatever. But also I just think, you know, with that moment, like you said it there, it's just a bit of fun. And actually having that 5 minutes where you're having a bit of fun there and then you put your phone back into your pocket and carry on with your day, it's just a nice way to break things up, I always think.
But then is that immersion or is that escapism? Or are they two synonymous things?
I think they're synonymous things for me. Okay. Because immersion for me is escapism. I like to be taken out of my busy schedule to play certain games, whether the games are, you know, something that has to be, your mind has to be stimulated or something where it's very easy. That's my immersion, you know, because I can spend hours on it. I don't feel like it's an addiction because I know when to, shut off, you know, but then there's that balance there because for some people, it can be seen as an addiction.
That was going to be my next question then. Thank you, Steph, for that lovely segue into like, you know, and this is something that the media does very well when it comes to gaming. They're always leaning on a couple of tropes about gamers. And as we know, we can see on this panel, we just all look differently. We all have different behaviors. We come from different backgrounds. But they always like to kind of brush gamers with this addiction issue. Do you know, what's your take individually on addiction. Here we go. What's your take on addiction in games, and how does that play with immersion? Because then also it comes to how games start to use microtransactions to keep people immersed in games as well. So give me your thoughts on addiction.
You've literally looked at me because this is part of my day job. So I speak to the media all the time on these kinds of things.
Yeah, you do. So I noticed.
Yeah, exactly. But the way I start it is like, first of all, look at the UK, look at the evidence. There's something called gaming disorder, which the World Health Organization brought in. There's a clinic in the UK that does this for 16 to 24-year-olds. It's been open for 3 years, and out of the roughly 10 million or so people who play in that category, they've had 300 people go to the clinic over 3 years. So it's not really there. What I would say though is like, so I personally, I think the term addiction, I think we use it a bit too loosely. I think a lot of the time we're meaning fun, engaging, interesting. But what I would say is there definitely are times where people are playing too much.
Yes.
But almost certainly it's because something else is going on in their life. They're having a tough time, they're feeling depressed. They might have, and one of the things that's really interesting if you look at the research around a lot of gaming disorder is they have this thing called comorbidities, where essentially someone who they say, oh, they've got gaming disorder, it's like, actually, no, it's often that they've got depression or anxiety or bipolar, and it's a symptom of it. And I think this is one of the things that we're getting closer towards, is a world where people don't automatically assume bad things about games, because everyone's growing up with it and getting used to it. But until we get there, it's nice for the media to have a headline about one person who's had a really bad time and say, that's what games is. Whereas actually it's like, that's not really the full picture, but we still have a responsibility to take that seriously and deal with that issue.
100%. But I can just like, how many times have you guys been asked, apart from you, how many times have the media asked you about addiction in games and asked you for like a roundabout statement that they can then use in their article?
You know what's funny? I don't want to invalidate people's experiences and, their stories and journeys, but gaming actually got me out of depression. And it was one of those things where growing up as a gamer, like that was, again, my escapism. That's where I got immersed. And when I was going through depression, I didn't know it was depression, but I knew one thing that was that I stopped gaming. I stopped doing things that, I enjoyed and stuff like that. Yeah. Then when it came to a point when I was, I guess coming back into myself, it was gaming that really, which is why I started my company, Nasaga, 7 years ago. Yeah. And I always say this in some of my interviews, like Nasaga's like pretty much saved my life because of how much I loved gaming and how passionate I was. And, going into, what you mentioned about like the clinics and stuff like that, and only 300 people, it's something where, it's such a small thing, but at the same time, when you flip it, gaming is something that helped me as opposed to it kind of helping people who are experiencing depression. Yeah. So it has its, its positives and stuff like that.
Yeah. And we know this, but it always seems to be that stickler. As soon as something bad happens, and then it's like, oh, it's the video games, And
it's not. It's literally not, because, again, I'll just use myself as an example. Like, I wasn't playing video games and I was depressed, but when I started playing again, it started taking me out of it. Obviously, yes, a couple with therapy and other stuff like that, but it took me out of my depression. So does that mean, is the gaming and the addiction a linkage or something?
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you say about how many people that the clinic has seen, because when I talked to some of the scientists who were looking at this right before the decision was made for The Guardian, one of the kind of pros of including it was, well, we'll be able to help people more easily if we have an official diagnosis, but it sounds like they're not really helping people.
Well, that's the thing, is that they're helping people, but
the percentage is low.
Well, the percentage is low, and I don't want to go too inside baseball and get too boring here, but one of the things about them including it in this thing that was called the International Classification of Diseases, for fans out there.
I did a psychology degree.
But exactly, for the fans. But the thing about it is, it's not just like, here are the list of all illnesses that exist. It's like, it's a tool, but it's a tool set, and if something goes into there, and they essentially realise there's not many cases, they can take them out again, because they go, actually, it's not a useful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, which they do all the time.
Exactly.
They've taken
some other
homosexuality out of those kinds of lists.
They do what?
Yes, it was in the list for 42 years. Yeah. So when we look at those kinds of things, it's not to say, don't take it seriously, should still totally take this kind of thing seriously. But now the evidence base is developing, And as you say, so many positive stories as well, especially after lockdown. The number of stories I've seen about people using games as a way, especially of connecting with people.
Remaining social when we had to self-isolate.
Especially a lot of people who lived on their own and stuff like that. They were able to play online with their friends. Or
Me.
Exactly.
Legit.
And I think there is a tendency for the video game industry to get quite defensive. So
That's true.
I'm always quite cautious of going down that route because, you know, there are some kinds of games that do skirt very close to gambling.
Yes,
and that's the case, but that's not all games, and that's something that people seem not to understand. But I've been thinking about addiction a lot lately, and it's not because of games. It's because I've started sewing my own clothes. I know this sounds like a bit of a tangent, but I made
I'm
this
speak with you.
I want to see where this goes.
So what you said about Football Manager and lying awake at night thinking about it, I do that with sewing. When I was talking to these scientists about the definition of gaming disorder, some of the symptoms are like they think about it all the time, even when they're not doing it.
That was going to be my question. When does immersion become addiction?
Right, and it's like they would rather play games than do other things. Like, I would rather do sewing than work. I think about sewing when I'm not doing. Am I addicted to sewing? And is that a problem?
Right? Is that just an outlet or just...
Right, exactly.
They also see games as inherently, subconsciously, as a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there's that negative connotation.
And that's the thing, that's cultural, right? That is totally... I've had these conversations with people where people have said to me, like, games are a waste of time.
It's not a waste of time when they're trying to step in our business.
Well,
but also, the big question is, what would you rather we were doing with our time? And that is a societal thing. Yeah. It's like, but you don't want to go to school, you want to play video games. It's like, why don't they want to go to school?
Right,
exactly.
Make school better.
Yeah, make school better.
Gamify school, maybe. Just a little bit, make it a bit more entertaining or more fun.
But also just things like, you know, okay, like I was chatting to someone about this and I was like, do you read like trashy detective novels? And like, yeah, it's just like, why? Because they're fun. It's like, you know what? And
do you watch soap operas?
Exactly.
There's also detective games you could play.
Well, exactly. It's just like, have you heard of all of these games? Oh, those are great. But I think it's the sense that games still have that stigma about them being a waste of time. Because you could apparently be doing something else with your time. But fun is important. Having space 100%. To relax, unwind, chat with your friends. These are all really important things. And actually, it's one of the things as an industry, I think that we just need to be willing to embrace the fact that games are fun. And not be so apologetic if someone's a bit like, isn't that a waste of time? No.
You know, it's crazy because, you know, a lot of people ask me, do you ever feel like what you're doing is, you know, still fun? Because obviously what I do essentially is a job, working in gaming, just like everyone else. But
do you guys still watch movies?
Yeah. I think for me, because I see this as something where this is a passion of mine before it's a career, it's always, again, having that balance. So I'm always going to see it as ultimately fun, even though, yes, let's be honest, like the games industry can stress you, just like any other fields. But then it goes back into what you're saying about they don't see it as a serious thing.
They don't.
Until, you know.
Until it's making money.
Until it's making you money, you know, and that's when everyone's, you know.
Let's talk about the money.
To kind of flip it on its head a little bit. So there are games like, do you remember IMVU and Second Life?
I love that.
So let's not lie now. How many people, and maybe not here, but like there were so many people who would spend so long in these games. And you want to talk about it?
I'll just put my hand up. I thought you said like IMVU. I was like,
yeah, no, tell me about the IMVU days.
Okay.
It's just a safe
There's
space.
no judgment here.
I mean, maybe a little bit. Yeah.
But would you call it addictive? Because when, you know, you're in secondary school, you go on, what's it, mini clip and stuff. You go
I
on.
love mini clip.
Do you know what I mean? You'll go on like Nickelodeon will have like their own Hubba Hotel.
Iteration.
You know what I mean?
The past, isn't it?
There was this thing called like, I think Barbie's something, and I used to love Barbie, but they had their own like, I don't know if you guys ever played Millsbury.
No.
Millsbury. It was like IMVU and stuff like that. Back in the day, so many people loved playing it because you can play online, you exchange furniture and stuff. It's closed down now, but is that some sort of, is it an addiction or is it just something where you're playing and connecting with your friends?
Well, it's also one of the things about teenagers. It's a bit like people are like, oh, they're spending loads of time
Teenagers
playing
do
games.
that for anything.
Well,
They do for
I mean,
everything.
what else are they doing with their time? It's like by
We don't
certain
let
point-
them go outside.
No, exactly.
So-
You're not allowed to go outside. You can't drive.
Youth
you
clubs
know,
are shut down.
exactly. And it's
Yeah.
like, so they're spending all their time online. Well, yeah, of course. You know, especially like hanging out with their mates.
Exactly.
Because you're not letting them go outside, and it's a bit like, what happens here? Because I think it was both of you have mentioned that point about games being an easy target. It's like we could talk about all of the complicated things that have led to people feeling like, I don't want my kids going outside.
Or they need escapism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, we could do that, or we could just go, video games are bad.
Right.
And that just makes us feel better.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we've still got to get over.
There's a
is
lack
just
of
people,
complexity around
people being like, oh, that's complicated. But if we just say this thing's bad, we will feel fine
And it's
about
quite
it.
obviously a generational thing as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
Like all of the people making the decisions are people who didn't grow up with games, don't understand them, see their kids playing them and are like, I don't get that, so it must be bad.
Yeah.
Totally.
And
And
they've become more commercial as well and more mainstream.
Yeah.
So now there's more
Fortnite.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now there's more eyes on this particular industry.
Yeah.
People are now pointing fingers and trying to label things when it's not what it is, you know?
Well, exactly. And then there's the metaverse, right?
Well,
You
this
know. So
that's
just
the next
the
area.
segue in, right?
No, thank you for the perfect segue. The next, like, I guess the next level of immersion is quote unquote physically and digitally being in the game yourself. So like you have, if we take it to the, I guess one of the most accessible things is one, VR obviously, but there's VR paired with the environmental aspect, you know, the treadmill that you run on and you're shooting and stuff like that. Do you foresee games getting more and more immersive? Is it going to take? Because I think, Jordan says no. Because I think, you know, these things are there. They're accessible for those who have the money. But does every gamer want to immerse themselves to that level in a game or in a universe? I'm not sure I do.
No. I think it betrays a total lack of imagination. The big tech billionaires who think the only way I can get immersed in a virtual world is if I have a treadmill and a VR headset. Like, have you tried reading a book?
Yeah.
Like, I can read a book and I'm immersed. I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on in the world around me,
Agreed.
and it's just text on a page. Like, I don't need any of that other stuff.
And the thing is I think a lot of the time, like, first of all, they remove why are people hanging out in these online games together. It's like,
Yeah.
their mates are there, but they enjoy that game specifically, right? They enjoy
Yeah.
that environment. But it's just like, because people are like, oh, well, they can just hang out and chat online. It's just like, yeah, we've all got WhatsApp, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, do we want to spend 400, 500 quid buying VR headsets, but then going and buying a PC on top, then going and buying that stuff? And, you know, that's not to say that they won't find ways to use that tech. You know, I've seen people do stuff in relation to like rehab for people who've had major accidents, right? And it's fantastic uses.
Yeah, especially in health. Yeah.
Totally. But it's like, is that what we're all going to be doing? I mean, I'm finding that my Switch, my Series S and Discord, it's like, that's fine. You know, that's absolutely fine for me to be engaged with all of my friends. So I'm probably not going to be diving too deeply into the metaverse. Not yet, anyway.
Okay. I think, and the thing is with gamers, I can't think we kind of, again, we've had access to that for so long. We've already kind of had our own makeshift metaverse
Yeah.
in a lot of games. So then to kind of go that next level deeper, it's kind of like, well, we can already do this in this way. Do we need to physically be there? I don't know. I know personally, if there was a world where I could cast spells, I probably would be backtracking on this whole conversation. And there is one. So when I do get it, please do not take this opinion further.
But it's one of those things like, I don't know if you've had this chat with people who've been talking to you about the metaverse who are outside of games, where people have come up to me and been like, so what's great is you can like create your own character and you can go and like talk to people.
my God.
And you can go and do all kinds of different activities. It's just like,
Have you tried video
exactly.
games?
Exactly.
Have you tried the Lord and Saviour video game?
Exactly. May I present to you Fortnite? There we go. It's just like, but I think, you know, get away from the hype from that and look at the positive, which is everyone there is agreeing that what games do is valuable.
Yes,
That's them all
true.
agreeing. And even if, as you say, maybe the tech bros are taking it a little too far, I think the general principle is like online interaction can be good.
Yeah.
And if you think about how
to
so
learn
much of
that.
the time,
Yeah.
exactly, it's been like anything online is instantly bad. It's a
That's
good
how
step forward.
parents felt about Fortnite at first, until that 14-year-old won a bunch of millions, and now everyone's like, "Oh, Fortnite!"
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Genuinely, like I got phoned up by a radio station. They were like, "Look, we don't care about games, but now he's won this. We just want to talk to you all about this." And people
Yeah.
phoning
It's
in
like,
being like,
but how many years ago until, is it now that a boy's winning it? That like what you're interested? But that's, again, that's business. That's, at the end of the day, look at it from, people don't even care anymore if it's whether it's immersive or not. It's whether it's making them money or not, you know?
So there was a game called Spellbreak, which is sadly shutting down. But that game got me so immersed because it literally ticked all my boxes in terms of combat, battle royale, spells, elemental spells. Immediately, I'd be feeling like I'm the Avatar. And I literally was, because I used to whoop ass in that game. But that really ticked all my boxes. And that, for me, that's the kind of world that I'd love to be immersed in. So Any other suggestions on like what kind of worlds be that? What if you had your own fashion line in the virtual world?
Oh my god, actually.
To be fair, they don't do
Roblox
very
shop
well in
open.
fashion games. They should do more.
There are some, like the Love Nikki games. I love those games.
I've never played one of those.
I used to love playing like those fashion games online and stuff. I don't know if you ever played like the EastEnders one.
No. There's an
What in
EastEnders
the
one.
hell?
So I was on the World Wide Web doing everything. But on EastEnders, you basically get to dress up the characters. So like Pat and Dorothy and stuff like that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was so good.
What the hell?
Don't even ask. But anyways, like, yeah, I mean, fashion games will be so good to be immersed in.
Yeah, fashion games. A game where I get to like design clothes and make
And
them,
maybe
and then it
sell
actually
them.
has an effect in the game.
As I say, I still think you should be opening up a Roblox fashion shop. You know, the fashion brands are moving in. But now that you've mentioned that, I've now got a completely random idea that now you were talking about rubbish British TV shows. I would love a VR experience where you could go back and be in like rubbish British TV shows.
Just like an extra.
Yeah, like, so like I don't know, like Biker Grove or Grange Hill comes back, and
Biker,
you're just like you're
Biker,
able to just
Biker.
Or
exactly,
King or
but just like
something, that would be
exactly,
cool.
but picking the stuff that's like really mediocre or mundane.
That's
It's just like
hilarious.
that
Like,
would be it.
retelling the story and stuff.
Exactly.
Where's Phil? No, that'd be so funny.
I
I'm
love
thinking
that.
the pointless metaverse. Where you stood there and
This
you
is
get
your
stuff.
power
I think
fantasy.
that's the best thing, and probably the best way to sell it is like just pointless novelty experiences that will connect with people, as opposed to trying to replace, systems that already exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want a virtual meeting room.
No.
I think
I
that
don't want to
would
be with you in real life. When do I have to make effort to go digitally to spend time with you?
Microsoft Teams low-key do that. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've seen when you get like chairs and they're stacked up on it. When you go on, you see, and that's so weird.
I've seen that. It's odd stuff.
And so
It's not the metaverse I want to be in.
So, kind of in the theme of our conversation, you've talked about Football Manager, we've talked about open world games, and I guess the link between the two is that level of detail. So, for instance, you are playing with real football players, and in open world games, they really have to sell the environment. Is that the connection between the two? Is immersion dependent on like the level of detail, or are there simplistic games that you can immerse yourself in?
both can be true.
Yeah, it depends on your mood, right?
Okay.
So like The Sims, right, is really like mechanically complex, and that's what's interesting about it. It's like a kind of complicated toy, and you put things in and see what happens. But sometimes you do just want to play something really chill because that's your mood at that moment.
Yeah, and I think with certain games as well, it's like they might be simple, but to master them, you've really got to put the time in and get immersed into it. So if you think about something like Celeste, right, it's a kind of a classic example where mechanically it's actually a fairly simple game, but it is super hard. So you need to play it again and again. And so that gives you a completely different sense of immersion where what you're trying to do there is mastering something. And that's something realistically that compared to other things like books, TV, film, that's where games can often be really sort of standalone. Sewing, exactly, because you actually...
Let me plug the sewing.
Because mastering
But that is the
actual
thing I enjoy
activity-
most about it is getting better at it.
Yeah.
And that's what is true for games as well.
And that's it. And it's not to say, obviously, you don't get better at reading or you don't get better at watching things and seeing like those little moments, ooh, cinematographer's just done that thing, isn't that interesting? But there is something about, I mean, for me, going from one football game to another, Rocket League, where on the face of it, it's a fairly simple game. You drive around, smacking footballs into a goal. Then you play it for a few months and you're suddenly doing cartwheels through the air while everyone's sort of flying. Yeah,
What kind of Rocket League are you playing?
What kind of rocket? All I'm going to say is
Some gymnastics. Really?
all I'm going to say is high level. That's it. I'm right at the very top. I'm not at the top. I'm miles away from the top. But it's that sense of you can only get to that by like mastering the controls, and that I think is a different sense of how you get immersed in a game.
Maybe
compared
like
to
people
other
are looking for that because they're not getting it in the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Like if you're stuck in a job where you don't feel like you're progressing, you're turning to games where,
things. Or in the case of Football Manager, when I spend my entire working day looking at an inbox, I go and open a virtual inbox to sign football.
Well, this is my
farmers who
question.
play Farming Simulator.
I cannot remember the life of me, the game that someone suggested to me. It's a mobile game and it's about traveling around the world, but it's literally like screens of text.
Yeah.
And someone was like, "Oh, you'd love this game
80 days.
I think
Thank
it's 80
you.
days.
Yes, because you love storytelling." And I looked at it and I was like, "Why the hell would you recommend this to me?" Because I don't want to read text to be immersed, but that might work for somebody else. So because it didn't work for me at all. Do you find that there's certain games that you play that try to immerse you and you immediately shut off?
Absolutely, and they're big flops.
Which games are you talking about, sir? Can we get some examples, please?
too much.
No.
Okay, so
speak your truth.
obviously one big game that tried to, as we know, Anthem was a very big flop. Yeah, and there's games where I don't mind
But why did it flop? Before you,
they were very ambitious, and I feel like sometimes it's great to be immersive, but also be not realistic, but try and not cram too much. Because it ends from turning it to immersive, it ends up becoming overwhelming.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? And for me, when I like to play a game, I don't like to be overwhelmed because I'll just shut off. Like when it comes to reading text, I know you have to read to understand the story and understand what you have to do, but more or less, I don't like reading per se, and I like to kind of figure things out. And only if I have to read, I will read. But there has been quite a lot of games that try to force that deep level, and sometimes the game doesn't have to be that deep to actually be immersive to enjoy. So.
That's the problem with the metaverse. It's like with Anthem, they were trying to make something to create and to fill a need that wasn't there. It's the same with the metaverse. Like they're like, oh, people will love this. Let's make it, and then they'll come.
But I think as well, it's like there's that sense of what do people actually want and what works for them. Because again, one of the really common things I have to do in terms of my day job is just tell people the breadth of games out there. So often people come to me and just be like, video games, it's just FIFA and Fortnite and Call of Duty. And it's like, but they're huge games, they're so popular. But you can also be an angry goose in a village. You can also play these enormous, you can go and set up your dream farm in Stardew Valley. And I think one of the key things about games that made them so successful is the fact that you can find the thing that works for you. And it might be, sometimes I love going through narrative adventures, right? Like I loved Overboard by Inkle. And sometimes I don't want to see any text at all. I just want to see, a car crashing into a hill. Like that's fine by me. That's it, exactly. Like I'm absolutely fine with that. That completely works. But I think there's that sense of you've got that room to choose, and I think that's what often makes games so powerful and why they can be so immersive to so many people.
One thing is that obviously companies want you to be as immersed as possible in games. We're of a certain age. The younger generation, where immersion is, all they want to do. Do you think, like we said about gambling, but do you think companies prey on that immersion need from the younger generation?
Absolutely.
In what way?
Like again, having like microtransactions in the games, or if you want to get to this certain level, you have to buy V-Bucks or you have to buy certain things.
This is why I don't play mobile games,
Yeah, because I'm not, you know what I mean? I'll be happily play the free version, but like people want to, in order to unlock certain things, you have to buy this, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. And I feel like it gets to a point where, because the younger generation, especially Gen Z, they don't have time to take it all in or think about, okay, maybe I shouldn't do this. It's, for example, one social media, TikTok, it's very in and out because they're so rampant in consuming quite a lot without kind of actually taking everything in. And that's where a lot of companies then tend to kind of prey on how they consume things.
On the same method and nature of consumption. Okay, what do you both think about
George
immersion in the younger generation?
I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll let you dive in first because I'm still processing.
Whether they prey on the young. I mean, that's why we have laws about that kind of thing, right? But also, I mean, my tendency is to say that the problem isn't with the idea of games and fun, it's capitalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do we have free-to-play games?
Well, exactly. I mean, so
because of capitalism.
Well, because this is the thing: is that when you think about games, the big shift, they used to be sold for a cost, and then the biggest games have now become like services. And actually, to keep the service going, you have to keep making money because you have to hire the staff, you have to pay for the servers, you have to do. So you need to keep going ahead and making money, and people are happy with the idea of. You run a shop in the real world, right? True. People are happy to keep buying from you as long as you're providing value, as long as you're being transparent, as long as you're following the law. And I think the issue is for a lot, what goes on digitally is that people don't know how these things operate or the kinds of tax they're using. So going back to that point about it's capitalism, right? There's this thing called nudge, which is this idea of like you can push people to do certain things by changing their things.
Yes.
So for example, a pint of milk, if you want to go and buy it from your local shop, it's always at the back of the shop because they worked out that you walk past everything and you walk back again. And phone notifications are red because that specifically triggers a bit of your brain to go and take that more seriously.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest thing about all of these things is we're doing these kinds of things everywhere in society. Games are a representation of it. So what you need to do is you need to help teach young people about how to deal with that stuff. So through what we do at work, we run like lesson plans teaching kids about in-game spending. What are the different types of in-game spend out there? What might you consider doing? And how would you balance that as part of your pocket money? Like imagine your parents are giving you £10 a month. If you spend all of it on games, you can't spend it on other stuff that you might want to do with your mates. And so it's about teaching them to have that kind of resilience and responsibility, which is really hard to do, by the way.
100%. I remember when my brother got in so much trouble for spending my mum's money on the phone bill that came back at like £500 for the mobile game. So that's why it's always been a concern for me, because they don't necessarily have the tools to know better, and also at the time it's such a new occurrence that the parents hadn't prepared for the fact that their children would be wanting to spend money on their devices that they pay for every month. For this experience that they, innocently, they just want to have fun. Yeah,
totally. And again, another thing that I have to do with the day job, I spend a lot of my time talking to parents, right? And going to parents and saying, look, have you put the PIN number on your device, right? Because if you put the PIN number on your device, they can't spend the money. And they're like, what PIN number? I was like, oh my goodness me. So I'm spending a lot of time trying to make sure that alongside doing that, we do adverts to parents. We go and run like parents' evenings to go and teach them how to do this so that we avoid that kind of stuff. Because you're right, it's a real challenge. And if you're not, we've talked about people not knowing much about games, right? If you don't know that games now sell stuff in them for, maybe completely perfectly fine reasons, but you've not planned for that, and you suddenly get a horrible bill, I tell you, it's not going to make you like games. It's why the industry needs to take it seriously.
But yeah, in terms of immersive games, for me, I think open world is the next step with a lot of games developing. Obviously, Assassin's Creed, The Witcher, all of that stuff. Do you think now non-open world games can be immersive? You think everyone's moving towards this open world setup, and that now it feels so restricted when you don't play a non-open world game? So for instance, I played Ratchet and Clank recently. You guys are excited.
That's such a good game.
It's such a good game.
I love Ratchet and Clank.
That's so good.
But there were certain areas I was like, oh, I can't go past this place. That feels so restricting. And I'm like, I wish I knew what they were actually doing. So you have really it does feel like a movie, but there's limits to that movie. Whereas if that game was open world and a bit more capacity for me, I think I would have enjoyed it so much more. Go ahead. I know you guys are ready to go.
The open world hater has logged on. The thing I'm most interested in games is novelty and design and mechanics that are doing interesting things and telling interesting stories and new kinds of experiences. And unfortunately, a lot of open world games, because they're going for that kind of lowest common denominator and trying to make as much money as possible, they're just recreating things that they know people have spent a lot of time in and they can get a lot of money out of them. That doesn't interest me at all. So I actually find open world games in general, like I said, I like the Assassin's Creed games because they're at least in a different world each time.
Yeah,
and I can walk around Egypt or whatever. But yeah, Breath of the Wild or like anything set in the modern day, I just don't want to walk around a city and do side quests.
Why do you want to walk around London?
Right, exactly.
I liked Watch Dogs. So
I like London as well. Come on,
Camden, like what?
I'm trying to leave.
It's good to see your hometown. I like the balance of both.
Okay.
Again, it's all depending on how I feel, my mood. If I want to explore for God knows how many hours, just running around and stuff, then I'll do it. If I want to have something a bit more restrictive, I would do it. But at the same time, for me, there's no in between. Open world, non-open world, there's still that immersive feel.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. I think as well, for a lot of this, I think about almost like open-ended. So like, it might not be open world, but you might be able to play the game. So I think about Football Manager, but the game I played loads over the last couple of years. Exactly, got to bring it up.
And again.
And again. No, it's Slay the Spire, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a roguelike. And
Isn't
building
that
decks.
Side-scroller 2D?
So it's 2D, but it's all about building like decks of cards. But every time you go through, you get different cards every time you go up a level. So you have to build different decks. I've probably put about 120, 130 hours into that because every time you play, you get a completely different feeling.
Hades.
As well. Hades as well, right? That's it. And I think it goes back to what you said. It's about novelty, freshness, and it's about that ability. I mean, Hitman 3 actually. There was a game
What
where
a game.
what a
It
game.
was a great game.
It's a game where you play it, and the first time you complete it, and there's that kind of sense of you're almost sort of doing what you've been told to do. And then as you play it again and again and again, more options open up. And by the end, you're able to do pretty much literally whatever you want and in whatever way. Exactly. Into a very stealthy GTA. But that I think is a great example about how it's not necessarily about, is it open world? It's just about, do you have loads of
Possibilities.
Possibilities. That might be. That's the connection. That
was it. Oh, that felt like
beautiful.
That was a metaphor for life.
My question is, with the possibilities, does it have to have possibilities or endless possibilities, or can you just be satisfied?
Yeah.
And still
on your
feel
mood.
Yeah, because I mean, there are certain games where, I mean, they've only lasted a few hours, but they've absolutely held unpacking.
What a game!
And it's like, I've not played it.
I will never understand that game, but anyways.
It's cool.
It's cool. It's just because I moved a lot when I was a child. So unpacking. Exactly, it's very true. Exactly. We've taken different approaches, but I think the end outcome is to say, like, actually, that can be engaging and immersive as well.
One game of the year, so.
Oh, well, exactly. It did something,
Multiple.
right? Well, exactly. So.
Oh yeah, you presented the award.
It's like big deal. There we go. But it was. I think there's that possibility there for those kinds of games as well. They're not going to hold you forever, but the 3 or 4 hours that they do really matters.
Like a really good movie.
Very true. So the thing is with a lot of open world games, you know, the open world that you're escaping into these new places, for instance, The Witcher, Horizon Zero Dawn, but the main character has to go through some really bad stuff for you to like kind of roam around the world, and you're dealing with like really terrible circumstances when you go through some of these side quests, etc. Is that escapism? Does that still count? Like, is that kind of immersion positive when you're having to put the character through psychological trauma?
Well, there's this psychological phenomenon called catharsis,
Okay.
which is when it's like a Freudian term. It's kind of like, you know, when you're dealing with a horrible boss, so you go into a video game and you kill something, you get that kind of release of catharsis, right? And I think the thing with like it being escapism, but the character going through some bad things, I mean, that's just fiction, right? Like you wouldn't emotionally relate to a character if they just had a perfect life and had nothing going on. Like when you read a book, it's not like they woke up, they went to their lovely job, they kissed their beautiful wife, and then they went home. Like,
you're reading the wrong book. That's what I'm going to say.
Stuff happens.
Well, I completely agree, because I'm thinking about this point and thinking about culture, and I'm thinking about Shakespeare, who wrote tragedies in which people get cooked up and eaten in pies. We're talking about Orwell's 1984. You know, it's an incredibly depressing book about authoritarianism, Stalinism. If you look towards 12 Years a Slave as a Best Picture winner, that was not an enjoyable couple of hours for anyone who watched that.
Definitely not for me.
But it was hugely important. And it's just like, you look at those things, and actually games are culture. And because they're culture, they will take those looks at those kinds of things. And because you've got agency over it, it gives you that different sensation. It gives you that different feeling. Playing something like, it's the classic example like Spec Ops: The Line, where you're constantly on the barrier between, is what I'm doing here good? I'm advancing in the story, I'm winning the levels, but what I'm doing is bad. It's objectively bad. How does that make you feel? And that's something that I think games has a cultural means that others might not.
But like that, what you said about games giving you agency and that making it in some cases more immersive. Like I argue in this book that games make really interesting philosophical thought experiments because you have the control, right? Yeah. So like instead of sitting in a classroom and someone saying, what would you do if you had 2 people and you had to kill one of them? You play through it, yeah.
And you see your own psychological assessment, I guess, pathways in your mind and how they play out and what your choices are. Yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes don't you think they take it a little bit too far, and that can break the immersion though?
Definitely, but I think it's just about you as an individual and how you separate yourself from what's happening with the game and I guess what's happening within yourself in real life. But then at the same time, it's like, you know, certain people just grow certain attachments to certain characters, especially when you're playing really in-depth interactive games.
What kind of characters do you like attach to?
For me, in terms of like attachment, I look at it from more of a representation perspective,
Makes sense.
as opposed to me and this type of character live the same life and stuff. So that's how I look at it. But in terms of, because again, fictional stuff, so I don't have an attachment per se to, I guess, stories, like to get like game characters in their lives, but more so from a representational standpoint. But then at the same time, it's one of those ones, like as you mentioned, you know, like a stress reliever. So like, jumping on GTA, running people over, that's just my stress reliever. But it's not a thing that I'm actually gonna go do in real
Killing
life.
people.
Right. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, sometimes you can play the antagonist, right? And as you mentioned, you're progressing through levels, and it's not right, but you're progressing through levels, and it's that. I guess it's like that kind of angel and devil on your shoulder with, okay, I'm really doing well in the game. It's really immersive, but then morally, it's not right. So it's where do you find that balance? But I can detach myself from it.
For me, like, I'm so glad you touched on the representation point, because that's one thing that will break immersion for me, and I will never return to that game ever again. So like, if I see something that culturally does not make sense.
Yeah,
Why am I like, no,
Yeah.
I can't physically get back into the game. I'm like, shut down, I want to delete it, and it's a waste of my money, or I'll get my money back, because I think the research that needs to go into games sometimes for that immersion doesn't happen, and therefore what they're aiming for just gets missed. Especially with the lens of like being a black woman, it's so interesting to see how some games miss the simplest cultural details.
Yeah.
It is. Immersion is, I think what we're establishing, it's subjective.
Yes.
It's a delicate balance also for publishers to create this environment where you can lose yourself, but also sometimes it's not that complex. Sometimes it's just like a simple game like Abzu, where you can just literally just swim. And the graphics aren't top tier, but it's just so nice for you to lose yourself in. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining me on the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
I've been immersed. Let's go.
See what you did there.
That is it. Thank you so much for watching GTV. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.